chain eat that forever.
Oh, yeah. Tears of Dallas. I could chain eat that forever, is what Keith said.
Yeah, that's right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. It is a bright and early recording for us here today. Mike has to take his mom to the doctor, so he woke me up. I have been awake for maybe 14 minutes, and I'm not happy about it. But this is what I do for you, Mike, and what we do for you, the viewers of this show, so that we can talk about Deep Space Nine, Season 4, Episode 16, Accession. I'm very excited to talk about the episode. It's cold, man. How are you?
It's cold. It's slippery. Be careful out there. Even our friends down in Texas, where it's supposed to be big and warm, are freezing their patooties off. Spoke to some of the patrons last night, Keith. We had a fun collection of about 6 patrons watching the show last night. Hey, folks, you can watch me watch Deep Space Nine and do it with me and chat with us all every usual Tuesday night before recording. So join that Patreon at patreon.com/KandM. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. Great episode, cool discussion. We're going to get to it quickly here today because there's a lot to talk about, and I don't want to shortchange the actual episode.
No, and all of the, like you said, we're on a TikTok. Got to take mom to the doc. That is what is happening. But we have to talk about last week's episode, Bar Association, very quickly. Everybody's ratings. And I think you even had to comment. I think you might have lowballed this one.
I was big wrong.
Because we have a lot of labor supporters in our viewership, no surprise. And here is what they thought of Bar Association. Joshua Cronin gives it a 95. Jason Moe with an 87. Delusions at Noon with an 86. JD with a 94. Worf's Big Ol' Boot Shifts with a 92. Kevin Miles with a 95. And Harry Pothead 100 self-sealing stem bolts. You know what? I'm glad to hear that. I love it. I also enjoyed the episode. I think maybe I lowballed it too, because I think our criticisms of the episode were fair. However, the bigger picture part of it, I definitely think we missed the glow of the importance of the episode.
We run into that wall sometimes, right? Whereas I guess maybe so there's a disconnect. So the thematic resonance of an episode on its face doesn't necessarily give it weight, right? Just because it's dealing with, like, the Ellen Kiss episode has cultural significance, right? But that doesn't necessarily make it a good episode of television. So I don't know, we sometimes we forest from the trees here, and that's why our viewers are there to remind us.
Well, but also the importance of it within the canon of Deep Space Nine.
Fair.
Right, in terms of the character development and the changes that are happening. So, anyway, interesting discussion, lots more to come. We're going to get into it in this episode, Accession, which aired on February 26th, 1996. The top song, still tearing up those charts. I'm so glad you listened to it, and now you know the song, Mike. One Sweet Day, Mariah Carey and Boys to Men. Keep hitting your buttons.
Buttons. One sweet day. It's freaking early.
There you go. That's what you get.
Wow. This is, wow. You're patreon.com/K&M.
Guy beard right now.
Yeah, well, and I haven't showered for this episode. I showered last night. I was like, you know what? I'm going to shower last night. It'll be fine. I'll get right in there. And then I woke up this morning and my hair was
Yeah, I took,
just absolute chaos.
I had to take some Robitussin DM to get to bed because of the cough, and that stuff. I am fully on drugs right now. I am 100% drugged.
That is to be fair. It is COVID, Mike.
Yeah, it's COVID, Mike.
So I'm just sleepy and grumpy. So I have no excuse whatsoever, except for that you dragged me up to do a show at 10 a.m.
Well, it was that or we had to punt, and as the Eagles showed us this weekend, Keith, punting sucks.
Well, yes. I mean, we just release it tomorrow. It's not a big deal. Whatever. We're doing it. That's what's happening.
We're doing it.
The top movie, Rumble in the Bronx. The Jackie Chan movie.
Ah, yes. Is it another Chris Tucker joint?
I don't think it was Chris Tucker, but I'm not entirely sure.
They had quite a run together.
They did a lot of stuff. So there you go, Mike. What were we watching on TV?
Keith, a lot of stuff, normal stuff. But what I wanted to spend our TV time on today was last week we mentioned that ABC was trotting out that first season of Second Noah, and we pieced together it was basically like a Seventh Heaven meets Brady Bunch with a zoo.
With a zoo, right.
But to see if we can jog our memories, here was the opening scrawl. Here are the opening
credits. Please enjoy the Second Noah podcast.
Yeah. Oh boy, that is something
Keith and Mike review
the first
Noah.
Season. That would be a funny podcast. Anyway, here's what we didn't watch. That laptop.
Love is a secret everyone knows. Love is a chime that rings when the wind blows.
Oh my God.
We live on the promise of somewhere to go, where without time.
James Marsden, there he was.
James Marsden with his 90s hair.
Isn't it so?
It's one of those long intros.
The cast is huge.
They could only afford
no wonder
one
it
season.
didn't survive. Yeah, exactly. Wow.
All right,
wow.
well, listen, on its face, let's buy a zoo family with clearly some, I'm guessing, heavy-handed religious themes. It's just, I didn't have any watch the episode. I could just tell. You could tell, right?
Attractive white people.
There's a juju
in their khakis.
How do we afford a zoo?
But we found Jesus. Yeah, that's basically, yeah. All right, well.
I can't back that up. We had never watched the second of it, but...
until Keith and Mike watched Second Noah here on the Patreon.
We'd watch the pilot. What do you say? If I can find it? So random.
We're going to put up the Patreon slide. It's empty. It's amazing. Everyone's gone. Wow. There it is. Well, so what was Voyager doing?
Better
that
question.
Night?
More apropos.
Let me tell you, this is a great episode. It gives even me hope. It was the episode Life Signs. Are you a bald holographic doctor? You're not a real person.
Mm-hmm.
Might you still get some? You just might. On the episode Life Signs.
Keep some quick other Star Trek Voyager news that I shouldn't even say, but I'm going to say it. The same team that put together the really cool 4K upscale of Deep Space Nine that I'm watching right now, that Paramount is big mad about. They didn't want to do it themselves, but they're pissed at the people because they're hunting down those folks who are trying to download the AI upscale.
They're making Paramount look bad.
Yeah, but I'll say this: they also are very proud of their upscale of the complete Voyager series.
Oh,
and
you better get that. Get your hands on that.
I might know a guy who has a hard drive with it on it. So that might be the seedling that has planted the next podcast.
Now, here's the thing, folks. Let me get the mic close here. The first time we started talking about this podcast, I mentioned doing the Voyager after we do Deep Space Nine, and the look on Mike's face, the stricken look of like it was in season 1 Deep Space Nine. The first time I mentioned it, the stricken look of despair and agony on your face. In season 1, we're here in season 4. You've already downloaded the show. I think we got you. I think we've hooked Mike. It's too late. It's too late for you, Mike. You are. It's over. It's over.
All right, let's go.
So. Speaking of recycling ideas, the Weekly World News headline, you know what? Mike said, hey, why isn't there a headline? And I'm like, let me tell you why. Because the February 26th cover of the Weekly World News headline is exactly the same as the Weekly World News cover from January 30. So, like 4 weeks later, they just
it?
copy pasted the pilot photographs and Angel cover, and I was like, it's got to be a mistake. So I was zoomed in and looked at the date on the cover. They're different dates. So that's how
they ran another week, a week in between, and then they just went back.
They ran like 2 or 3 weeks, but then went back. It's not the first time they've done this. Literally the exact same thing.
Well, God bless them. I wish we could do that.
Attention to that's right. So enjoy this episode. Keith and Mike discuss Sons of Moog. That's right. Amazing. Anyway, so that's what was happening. Let's talk about who directed Accession. That was Les Landau, a frequent director who last directed Crossfire. And it was written by Jane Espenson. This is Jane's only trek, but she went on to write for a litany of legend and fantasy properties, including Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Firefly, Game of Thrones, and the Battlestar revival, all of which phenomenal series. Very, very cool. And this episode has an uncredited brush-up by Renee Echevarria. Which means it is time for everybody's favorite bumper. Now, Keith, waste your time with trivial trivia.
It doesn't quite have the same sauce anymore if I don't go, with what?
That's true.
It's all about collaboration here, Keith.
Mike, you gotta bring, oh God, it's morning. It's morning. But I haven't had time to do my old man coughs.
I said to Jen, because the other night I was like, was I coughing in my sleep? And she goes, well, you were doing that one cough. And I was like, which one that? She's like, the wheezy one. And I was like, oh God, there's a vocabulary of coughs for me.
Yeah. This is a show after 40. Yeah. Great.
That really spread the COVID cough.
Ah, boy. You're welcome, Anne, listening to this with earbuds.
The dulcet tones of two old men slowly dying? Maybe not so slowly dying.
I mean, I don't know if it's dying. It's just like, it's 17 degrees here. It takes a while for your car to start up. We're sort of the same thing. It just, Keith, we need to
We are of old.
We are of old. We are indeed of, we try to resist it, right? We're initially reluctant to take on the title. I'm not familiar with this. I've never been here before. Why are you assigning me this title?
So real quick, because I'm going to forget, and I promised Jen I wouldn't forget. I'm sorry to interrupt. CEO Jen's rating for the episode, which we should give next week, but I'm going to give it now, right?
Yeah.
Because she made a funny, and she loves when she makes a funny. And I said, well, what did you think? Because she watched it in the other room while I was watching with the patrons. She's the best, right?
You don't deserve her.
This is her rating. And I was like, touche. Well done.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well done.
That's it. Well played, Jen.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Woo, Jen with the zinger.
I thought about stealing the joke, but then I said I couldn't possibly do that.
You can't steal from your wife. She brought you coffee.
She did.
I mean, right before we came on air, your wife and my ex-wife both brought us coffee to begin this. We've done well. We've done well. All right, trivial trivia. That's what we're doing here. So,
Dear Mom, I'm going to be late.
Yeah, what? Hey, look, you're the one who had to try to steal your wife's joke.
I kind of think we should reschedule. It's very slippery out there.
This is your fault for stealing your wife's joke. Okay, so the ship flown by Acoram Lan is the same model used in the episode Explorers, the same lightship model, which I wonder if they adapted it a little bit because it did look different to me, but maybe it's because it was like spinning out of orbit. But because it didn't seem the same. But they say it says so on IMDb, and that's it's like the internet. It's like Wikipedia. You can't be wrong. But I can't imagine why they would make a second model for that quick little shot. The closing credits of this episode feature a number of changes from the previous episodes. Ron Wilkinson has replaced Fritz Zimmerman as the set designer, and Herman F. Zimmerman is changed from production designer to visual consultant, and his position in the credits is switched with art director Rendell McCalvin. This reason was due to the fact that a number of the Deep Space Nine crew was helping out on the production of Star Trek First Contact, which was in production right now. Phenomenal movie, and I think probably the best of the Star Trek movies. Although, Wrath of Khan, there's a lot of good ones. But anyway,
It's fun, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think about we often talk about the theatrical universe because it's what we know, and even these big Broadway productions are kind of bootstrapped situations. And so, oh my goodness, we're down some cast members on the second tour. Grab somebody from the Broadway cast, shove them over, mix it up, match it. And it's fun to know that even at the multi-million-dollar production level, they're just doing the same crap. Oh, does Jim have a saw? Send him over to the movie set. He needs to make some backdrops.
Well, I tell you what, my Uncle Jim was working on First Contact.
Yeah.
So he was.
They pulled him out of the basement.
Well, they pulled him out of Voyager because he was doing Voyager at this point. And I bet Sean probably did. I don't know if Sean remembers that he. I know that he worked on the next one.
Have you met Sean? Probably not.
Probably doesn't remember. But yeah, no, they were both working hard on First Contact. So good fun. David Warner, of course, from multiple different Star Trek things, including Star Trek 5 and 6 back to back, was offered the role of a Coram Lon.
Yep.
But he turned it down because he was on vacation. And his wife's like, nuh-uh, we're on vacation. So there you go. And lastly, this is interesting. The producers had to fight to get this episode made because the studio had told them not to do any more shows about the Bajoran religion. Episodes such as In the Hand of the Prophets from the first season and The Collaborator from the second had proved to be somewhat unpopular with the viewers. And Paramount felt the shows dealing with religion in general and Bajoran religion in particular were not ratings winners. According to Hans Beimler, shows about religion, alien religion, and the prophets are extraordinarily difficult, not because they're hard to produce, but because they're not proven ratings winners. As a result, the studio tends to be happier when Deep Space Nine is doing action stories. Similarly, Renee Echevarria explains the studio doesn't like Bajor stories, and Bajor's religion is one aspect of Bajor in which they really don't respond. And we can get into this as we go on. And it's interesting because I have so many different perspectives on that idea. And I understand why they might have trouble with viewers, right? Because half of Star Trek fans are godless monsters like me, right? Or they might be religious and find the taking seriously of this sort of fake religion offensive there. Or they might find it just sort of like it's such an intellectual, heady topic, and there's not a lot of running around in pews. And I think for me as a kid, I was more like, yeah, get to the pews. Yeah. Today as an adult, I find it absolutely fascinating, and I think it has a great deal to say about our contemporary religion, and perhaps that people were like, hey, stop poking holes in my deal, and I imagine that might be. It's when you look at it objectively, it doesn't always hold up well when you shine a light on it. And I think that is perhaps what's happening here. Anyway, I think it's fascinating.
I think that's actually that's the most interesting conversation for me to have today. And I'll just kind of preface my conversation for the end of the show right here at the top with what you just said. I think it's all of the above, clearly. And I think one of the places where you can see the episode struggle with that is in the fact that, so we were having a conversation with the patrons last night, that religious arguments on their face are very interesting, right? Because you have two very staunch, generally, audiences and believers or non-believers, however you want to label it, on either side who have very strong opinions. And so that can be very furtive for conversation and discussion if cooler heads prevail. Unfortunately, when one of the sides of an argument is arguing blind faith, it's very hard to have a rationally based conversation when one of the parties is, and I'm not even putting it down, right? I'm playing really level playing field here. And so translating that to art and trying to say something with that through that debate, it becomes very difficult because your options are leave it completely unsettled, right? Which is not particularly satisfied in a 3-arc structured type of show or 5 acts. Or do what I think this episode does, which is scapegoat it and kind of just like give you a concrete answer, like discover the answer. And that doesn't quite feel fair to I think, the more salient part of the argument, which the whole episode spends its time making. So we'll get there.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and we'll get into it because I think Kira gives the thesis statement when she paraphrases Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah, they also let her completely off the hook. Like, they let her hypocrisy not hypocrisy.
What's not hypocrisy?
No, I know,
faith.
I can't come. It's faith, but she struggles with it, and it is. Many examples are thrown in her face throughout the episode of why perhaps her blind faith is misplaced.
For sure,
but then there are no consequences for her.
Well, I don't think the consequences to her is the challenge to her faith.
Yeah, but she didn't
and
have
having to wrestle.
Yeah, she had to wrestle, and she made a decision, but then didn't have to follow through with that decision. And right. So they're kind of like, oh, well, we'll get to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a feeling I'm going to like this episode better than you are.
Well, we'll see. Sometimes I change as we go. I grow,
yeah,
Keith.
But because I have so many thoughts, and also like as my life perspective changes, and like the way I look at this differently at 43 than I did at 16 when I first saw this. Interesting, fascinating. We're going to get into it. Before we do, we have to quickly but fascinatingly thank our patrons, Mike.
Yeah, we'll do a quick. They had such a great conversation last night, and I hope you could join the team. That conversation's ongoing all through the week on our Patreon page, which you can find at patreon.com/KNM. These are the fine folks who are part of that. Like I said, main thing you get is to watch me watch behind a paywall the every episode of Deep Space Nine and maybe Voyager coming up. We also have interviews with cool people like Keith's brother who worked on the show. Maybe one day the Emmy Award-winning Jim that you've heard so much about. Who knows? He's very busy. But we're also...
He's not. He's just shy.
Yeah, family picnics where we watch movies together and do all kinds of fun stuff. Plus some secrets and surprises along the way. You can join the team, patreon.com/KNM. We need one more person at $1 to give us a random benchmark. So join the team. We appreciate you. There are 30 lurkers, Keith. 30 free members who don't actually get to see anything. They just joined as a free members. So if any one of those people converts over to the $1, we're in the money.
Hop over. The water is
tepid at best.
Inconsistent. And the water is sometimes there and sometimes not, and sometimes too much and sometimes
filtered,
not enough.
But it's like an old Brita, you know?
Yeah. It's not great.
It's a unique flavor.
All right. Well, we got some unique flavor of guest stars this week, including Mike. You're welcome. Rosalind Chow is back as Keiko O'Brien. Robert Simmons is Porta. Camille Saviola is back as Kai Chewbacca. Hannah Hate is back as Molly O'Brien with Richard
Sisko.
With Richard Libertini as Akorum Lon.
Stop it.
I think it's time to go into the screening room and get into our deep philosophical discussion of religion by two old men at 10 o'clock on the moment. I can't even speak.
Those aren't words. Keiko, no, you didn't. This is such a purgatory.
Yeah, indeed. We clearly are not in our correct Dejara. I'll tell you that.
No.
So in the teaser, Bashir and O'Brien are back from playing fighter pilots in the holosuite. Mike, you have a poster commemorating such things.
I do indeed.
Then they're frantically cleaning the messy quarters in preparation for Keiko coming home after a year. And, Colm, not a fan of that scene. Because he's like, why does the man have to be messy? I think Colm might keep a tidy house. I don't know, we'll find out. The shuttle arrives at the station. And O'Brien greets Keiko and Molly at the airlock. And they, as Mike would do, make out immediately right there in public in front of their child.
I love the framing throughout this episode, and it starts great in the teaser there about how they're hiding their friendship, the newfound bromance, like it's this illicit affair. It's so wonderful, that first scene. It's so tasty. It's kind of like Keith comes over for the weekend and we're playing. There's just like toy boxes everywhere and action figures on the floor. And I'm like, oh, we gotta clean up before someone comes over and knows that we're just playing with toys.
Yeah, I mean, just like 17 half-opened bags of Cheetos all over the floor. like Xbox controllers and batteries everywhere.
Yep.
That's exactly how it would be. It's basically what our apartment looked like in Brooklyn 20 years ago.
Yeah, just Chinese food boxes and other people's bills because so many subletters having mail sent there. I'd be like, wow, this is a hospital bill. Does this belong to anybody? Keith's like, I don't know who that is.
Exactly. There you go.
Someone's dog. Remember you came home one time, there's just like a dog there?
I think it was your subletters, you
No,
jerk.
that was before I got there because I asked you why the room smelled like wet dog.
Oh, that's why I kicked them out and let you in.
That's the only reason my ass got in. You're like, well, you're homeless and the dogs are out. I guess it's next worst thing.
Talk about a lateral move.
Yep.
So Molly, holding a doll with a Bajoran nose ridge, nice touch, announces that, guess what? She has a little brother. And Keiko is preggo. Mike, what did you do?
It was weird. It was his whole response to this, I still don't quite clock.
Yeah.
Like you think the episode's going to be about him not knowing if he wants to be a dad again, but it's not really that. He's just sort of like, oh, am I going to still have man time?
He literally just wants to play. Like, it's not like I'm not ready to be a father again. It's not like I didn't, like whatever. It's I want to play Xbox.
Patrons did point out, and I probably wouldn't have clocked it otherwise, like how many times he has to reaffirm throughout the episode that like, hey, I got her knocked up in one try, baby. One pump. Let's do it. He like says it multiple times. He's like, man, we only hung out that one time, I guess. Hey,
I'm just saying. Yeah. Hey, if you want your warp drive infused, man. That's gross.
Well, you really pulled that out of nowhere. Well done.
Ugh, gross. Yeah, and as I wrote down, the next thing on my recap is, it only took one night for O'Brien's seed to grow to fruition. Meanwhile, an old Vedic has showed up to visit Kira on Ops. He's brought a young couple to be blessed by the Emissary. Sisko agrees to do the ceremony, but stiffly and awkwardly. The Vedic condescendingly compliments Sisko on his improving accent. It's clear that Sisko is still very uncomfortable being the religious icon. Then, something comes through the wormhole. It's a Bajoran light ship, 300 years old. And of course, when something comes through the wormhole, there's an injured person on board, and it turns out to be a Bajoran who wakes up in the infirmary, and Sisko introduces himself and Kira. And the old Bajoran man says, I am the Emissary. And that is the end of our teaser. Great setup. Mm-hmm. I thought was very interesting, and I thought the laying the track of I mean, this episode is about Sisko's relationship with being an emissary, but I thought that was a really interesting way to begin the episode. As an adult, as a kid, I'm like, who cares? But now as an adult, I'm like, that's an interesting conversation we're going to wrestle with here. So in Act 1, the Bajoran guy tells the story of being caught in an ion storm and dragged into the wormhole, which he took as the Celestial Temple. And he describes communicating with the prophets, just as Sisko did in the pilot. And, as it turns out, he spent 200 years in the wormhole without even knowing it. Mm-hmm. Because time is not relevant to the wormhole aliens. So Akoram talks about his dead family and not having any descendants. But, when he says his name, and I love this little wrinkle, Kira recognizes it immediately.
Yeah, Shakespeare.
He was a super famous poet. Poetry holding a huge part in Bajoran lore. This is no shade on poetry or poets. I'm a lyricist. Like, it is what I do for a living. But Star Trek, they're like, oh, everybody knows every poet. Poets are famous and Star. Well, they're not.
Well, here, I think they're using poetry as sort of like a ubiquitous art form for culture.
For high-end culture. For sure. But, like, doesn't Bajor have, like, rock stars? Doesn't Bajor have, like middlebrow culture? It's all just, like, the superest, highest falutin.
Well, I like that some of the more famous ancient cultural touchstones for us, even in our society, mm-hmm. are the philosophers, the artists, and the poets, really.
Yeah.
The playwright, the one playwright.
and before I make fun of our culture for our nonsense, we remember that Mozart was the pop music of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
the 2 points here that I think are really great insights are that, or fun, maybe not great insights, fun to play with insights are, let's remember that the majority of people that we revere as cultural heroes were only famous and quote unquote wealthy posthumously. Like, imagine coming back to life after 200 years and like, oh my God, Keith Varney, your musicals are next to Shakespeare in the pantheon of the American musical theater.
Yeah,
like,
pulling in huge amounts of residuals. Yeah. I'll never get it.
I'd love
I don't
to be
have
that
any
lawyer,
descendants.
right?
I'll just be my cat.
Yeah,
Charlie's gonna, like Charlie 35 is going to.
Keith tries to get a paycheck from Charlie. Charlie's like, don't know the guy.
Yeah, I've never heard of him. Doesn't give me my goo food in the morning. All right, so where were we?
Bashir Stinkface.
Oh yes. So he's shocked to hear that he was famous, like we described here, but he thinks this may all be part of the prophet's plan for him. Then he hears Kira's name, and he's surprised to find her in the military. Bajor used to have a strict caste system, and her castes were all artists. Uh-oh. The first time we think of trouble. When the Cardassians occupied Bajor, they gave up the castes, or Dajaras. Later, Sisko and Dax discuss. The sacred text might support this Akorum story more than Sisko's. Because again, we're interpreting ancient prophecy that, it's vague. It can apply to lots of different things. And this is where we start getting into commentary on our own, faiths of many types, religions of many types, and prophecies, and this, that, and the other thing. And it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, depending on who cares to, for whatever their reasons may be. So Dax can tell Sisko is excited to hand off the position of emissary. And to him, it seems like a win-win. The Bajorans will accept Sisko handing off the title if he does so willingly. And Dax asks Sisko, how do you feel? And he's like, it feels good. No more ceremonies to attend, no more blessings to give, no more prophecies to fulfill. I am just a Starfleet officer again. All I have to worry about are the Klingon, the Dominion, and the Maquis. I feel like I'm on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Great line. So on the promenade, Bashir congratulates O'Brien and drags him to Quark's to celebrate. Quark pours O'Brien a beer out of a coffee decanter, nice warm beer, and tells the story of when Nog was a baby.
Cute. Some funny lines.
Everything
here.
goes in the ears.
Mm-hmm.
Very funny. Bashir reminds him of all the downsides of having a baby. Then they run into Worf, who is still traumatized by delivering Molly in the Next Gen episode Disaster. Perhaps a good Patreon watch.
Jason, before we even started the show, gave me the whole rundown. They prepped me, Keith. It's really great having the patrons to kind of just make sure I'm prepared for each episode.
Of course. And I love how traumatized Worf was by that experience.
Great lines. Great comedic beat by Dorn here. Just really great scene.
Dorn's really funny.
Yeah, it's really well done.
And when they use funny Worf in a way that is consistent with his character, which this totally is, it's really, really well done.
I'll be on vacation.
I will be on Earth, far away.
Yeah, and he realizes that he has to be more specific, so he just spins a yarn terribly in the moment. So good. The only thing that ruins it, it's like they're too heavy-handed with it, is they have to have Bashir then comment on the joke they had on a Had It, which it would have been better if Worf just leaves and then they just take back to camera. But listen, you can't redirect an episode 30 years later.
Mike has notes, Les.
Yeah.
I
do.
Let's punch this up for 2024 comedy, not 1996 comedy.
Well, you know what line got funnier, right? Is I think Quark's line where he opens up and he's like, when they say O'Brien's having a baby, and he's like, oh, I thought the females of the human race carried the babies. So it's a great joke that gets funnier the more inclusive society gets. Right?
Yeah, not necessarily. All right, so But O'Brien admits he's a little bummed not to be able to spend more time with Keiko now that Molly is older. Well, you shouldn't have
Sent her away
planted
for
the
a year?
seed,
Oh.
or been quite so fertile. He was both too potent.
Yeah.
And she went away of her own accord.
Yeah.
That was her choice.
There's just gods and rods all over this episode, you know, Keith?
The new emissary is about to give his first speech, and Kira is there to watch. And Odo asks about her belief that Sisko was the emissary. And here's the thesis statement, if you're wondering about the thesis statement of the episode. Odo says, does that mean he never really was the emissary? No, but they can't both be. I don't know. What do you want from me, Odo? Forgive me, Major. I don't mean to be difficult, but your faith seems to have led you to something of a contradiction. I don't see it as a contradiction. I don't understand. That's the thing about faith. If you don't have it, you can't understand it. And if you do, no explanation is necessary. And as I mentioned before, that is Kira paraphrasing Sir Thomas Aquinas. And yeah, I mean, and that's why I'm glad this episode is not about whether or not the faith is real.
Mm-hmm.
Because any discussion ends up here. That is there is no discussion to have. You know, I used to, like, in college and high school, like, used to have the debate and, like, is there a God? Is there not a God? Whatever. Well, it's kind of a pointless discussion because it always ends up here, right? Because there is no way to objectively, you know, like, you're speaking in two different languages, right? It's like I'm going to adjudicate this using a 10-based numerical system, and the other person is going to adjudicate it using colors. It's not something that can be done.
And I agree with that. My for me, a more interesting, and why I was excited at the top of this, and maybe we'll continue as we go through, was that's great. But like we said, we'd like to see somebody fighting, being crying, right, and not just weeping. That's more active to watch. I want to see someone who has that type of faith from a good place, right?
Which Kira does.
Yes, what she does. Struggle with a situation in which she discovers that her faith was placed into the wrong hands, right? And because that does happen, Keith, right?
For sure.
And you discover that bad things happen because you misplaced your faith, and rather than having it all come out clean in the end and realize that, oh no, my faith endured because the prophets here ultimately led us to the correct answer, it'd be interesting to see how you deal with the fallout if that wasn't the case, right?
Yes. But I actually disagree with you. I think that would be the less interesting story to tell.
Maybe. Because
the someone questioning their faith in the face of these contradictions, right? In the face of these hypocrisies, I think that's a story that we've seen a bunch of times before, and it's a story that we all sort of understand. I think Kira's character is more interesting because she is aware of all the contradictions. She is aware of all the ways that her faith is being misused. I mean, win, for God's sakes, right? But that her experience is like her faith is more deep-seated than that and isn't shaken by all of this. And what does it say about her that it's not? What is like, what's going on there? And it's not because she's not seeing it or because she's not a rational or logical person. It's not because she doesn't understand all of these things are happening. It's that there's something deeper there for her that I think is a little bit more interesting than the person who's who gets sort of knocked down on the fence, and then you're sort of like wondering, are they on the path to letting go of this? I don't think she ever is, and I think there's just something about her which ties to her never giving up in the resistance. I mean, she buys in, and she will never give up. She will never stop fighting for whatever it is that she's doing. I think there's something interesting there. I mean, would it be me? No. No, I would be the person you're describing without question. but I think it's something interesting about
That's fair,
Kira.
I guess. And then, but then through that lens, juxtapose her with the priest guy who is of the same beliefs and but he ends up just murdering a person.
Right.
So,
Well, and that's the difference between somebody with blind faith, right, and somebody with open-eyed faith, who being open-eyed doesn't necessarily be a threat to your faith. His is much more fragile. Hers is much stronger because, like, I see all those things and I still have this, as opposed to I'm blindly following.
okay.
Also, that dude might have been just justifying his being a sociopath, but
Yeah, true. I mean,
there's plenty of that too.
I'm picking up. I do enjoy that. I think it is it's nice to see a story of that type of faith from that good perspective, right?
Well, and
it does yeoman's work, I guess, to try to show the counterpoint to that, right? As far as the other priest guy, but I don't know that. I ultimately think that the scapegoat ends up that it's trying to be Ben's story rather than hers.
Yeah,
and his journey.
It is. It is Ben's story. I mean, but her faith is a larger story throughout the run of the entire series. And I will say this, and I know we got to keep moving, but like when I was 16, I'm not somebody with faith, right?
Right.
And but when I was 16, but I'm not angry about it.
Mm-hmm.
I find it all interesting. When I was 16, I was angry about it, right? I was fiery and angry and just like had nothing but vitriol for it. But watching Kira's experience for me was my first time seeing a healthy, positive relationship with faith, because I didn't have a lot of good examples of that. And it was interesting to me to show somebody who is kind and rational and in the world and was not using her faith to harm anybody, nor was her faith harming her. Mm-hmm. And seeing a healthy, positive relationship with faith. The first time on Star Trek, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And but also she was sort of a guiding, like, it's not for me, but I can see actually how it can be a positive for somebody through this character of Kira and her consistency here.
Yeah.
Even though it's not without downsides and not without dangers, which we see with what she goes through in this episode.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that all is very clear, and I guess I'm asking the episode to be something it's not, because I want more of the conversation. Like I'm a person with faith, right? I would consider myself spiritually agnostic more so than like angry and or atheist. But
right. There
is a distinct difference in my experience and where my anger does creep in between faith, spirituality versus organized religion, which Bajor seems really seriously
to
organized.
Suffer from.
Yeah,
for sure.
And on top of that, they're also ubiquitous, right? It does not seem like there are people who are not religious, right, on Bajor. It seems like it's pretty much guiding principle of their whole vibe.
Yeah, they have sort of a half theocracy.
Yeah, but here's the point. At least at this point in the episode, we are having the conversation, which is challenging, and you can't always challenge your viewers because it'll turn a lot of them off. But at the same time, every once in a while, you gotta pepper it in, man. It's a seasoning that makes the show interesting.
And it is challenging. And that's the show's perspective, I think, is closer to my perspective than Kira's. But it's being willing to show the positive and the negative sides of a situation like this. That's fascinating. Meanwhile, did you see the big head extra alien in the background of that scene?
Yep, made comment of it too.
Wow, what a crazy makeup design. I wonder if we ever see that again.
It's going to go on one of Josh's shelf of just like random background extras.
Oh, Josh, do you have one of those? I gotta see it.
We looked at it in the customs last week.
No, not that alien.
No, I'm saying, remember, we pitched the idea of we should make a whole collection of the random background aliens. Yes. Oh my God, that was literally like 3 days ago we did that.
But I thought you meant he'd made a figure of this crazy big head alien. Yeah, anyway, you could barely see it, but when I did see it, I'm like, wow, that is a crazy design. I wish we'd seen more of that. Obviously, probably didn't look that good up close. Anyway, so Akorum begins his speech. He declares that Bajorans must return to their Dajaras.
Ruh-roh.
He says, the Bajor I have returned to has lost its way. People no longer follow the path of the prophets. The prophets have laid out for them. They no longer follow their Dajaras. artists have become soldiers, priests have become merchants, farmers have become politicians, which is a very direct swipe at Shakar. And of course, like you said, Rutrow, he is a fundamentalist. Kira looks stricken, but she claps anyway. Interesting. So in
what if?
Mm-hmm.
What if, God forbid, someone came through the wormhole and was like, you know what? All that stuff in the Bible, you got to do it. Like, you got to do it. We got to start stoning people. We got to stop eating the meats on Friday.
Stop mixing our fabrics. Let's all get slaves.
We got to do it. It's real.
Yeah, not so good. Not
a
so
lot
good.
of people being like, whose own wormholes will be puckering. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, literally everybody's except for, us.
We'd be like, nailed it. My favorite Simpsons episode is the one where Homer goes to heaven, and it's just like a whole bunch of people lined up in categories of different religions, and like they spin a big wheel, and he's like, yeah, it was the Mormons, and everybody else is like, no, and it's like they just go through a trap door. It's pretty funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Yeah, exactly. So in Act 2, Sisko calls Akorum to his office to question his call to return to the Dejaris. Farmers returning to farming would mean Shakar would have to give up being boring white guy president. Akorum is not going to call for him to resign now, but he doubts anyone will vote for a farmer later. And he hopes that people will start enforcing the Dejaras legally. Yikes. Sisko warns that caste-based discrimination is against Federation policies, and that would cost Bajor its chance to join the Federation. And here we go. Akorum says, Kai Wynn and I have already discussed it. And the other shoe drops. Interesting that they reference Wynn here without bringing her in.
That's the thing about if you write it's almost the worst part about being a great villain on a show, is if you write it well enough, the shadow's long enough that they don't even need you sometimes.
Yeah, just mention her and it's like, yep, very much, he's the bad guy. Like it was clear before, but now it's like,
and talk about respecting decorum, because you can tell in this moment Ben's like, take your goddamn thumb off my goddamn face.
I mean, he looks like he's about to knock the crap out of him here. Gonna Oscar him. So Sisko says, as a Bajoran officer, I am bound by...
Is my gate working, by the way?
What's that?
Is my gate working? Because that plow is really going for it.
No, I don't hear a plow.
Okay, good.
You did good. As a Starfleet officer, I am bound by oath not to interfere with Bajoran affairs. But as a friend to Bajor, I have to say that giving up Federation membership would be a mistake. Akorum takes hold of Sisko's right ear. Oh, touch me again. Your paw is strong. I see now why Kai Opaka believed you were the emissary, and why Wynn fears you. Which is very interesting that he would acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. That he would, which I thought to me was a sign that he wasn't as in bed with Wynn as, like, she not being controlled by Wynn. Or
yes.
This wasn't a thing.
The writing was really good because they clearly had a meeting where they were like, "Look, we don't want people to think that he is an incel, basically, right? Like a planted, a bad actor." And they somehow are able to whip it together in a few lines that I never felt like, maybe he's work. They have like a subplot with them, like Frank Langella.
Well, absolutely. Like it wasn't this whole big scam that he was a true believer, right? He really believed what he was saying. And I think you reference Wynn, and then you throw a little doubt in there because he mentions a vulnerability of Wynn. Mm-hmm. Like it's very subtle, but if you're paying attention, it really is great storytelling right there.
This screenshot is also called "Two People Pretending to Be in a Candid Photo."
It's like a stock photo.
Yeah, Adobe.
So the next morning in the Replomat, there are no seats, and a woman gives up her chair to Kira because she is in a lower caste. Kira is reluctant to accept this new reality, but she has faith in the emissary, and she tells Sisko, and I thought this was interesting here, we would have done anything you'd asked. because you were the emissary.
Mhm.
And, and I know that we've touched on this before, that Sisko and Kira's relationship is really complicated by the fact that Sisko really is a religious figure to her.
Mhm.
And like literally he could ask her to do anything and she would do it, which is fascinating, a dynamic within a relationship. So later that night, Sisko wakes up from a nightmare walking the promenade alone, then has a vision of Kai Opaka. And all she says is, "Who are you?" A bunch of times. Interesting. So in Act 3, Bashir confirms that Sisko has had what they call an orb shadow. Apparently, you have these hallucinations when you don't listen to the prophets. But Sisko, and again, getting back to our faith versus science, he takes an inhibitor and ignores it and says, don't you know what's happening? I just have extra neural peptides. No big deal. Interesting.
Yeah, his struggle is really nuanced, which is cool. Like, clearly he's not of Bajoran faith, right? But he knows he's tasked with maintaining the relationship between the Bajorans and the Federation. Additionally, he even comments in this episode, Federation ain't really that happy about his position anyway. No. He has to do all this ceremonial stuff. But at the same time, he's struggling with, maybe I not enjoyed it, but maybe I was, like, the whole thing is just really, his relationship with it is interesting. I almost wish the episode spent more time with that part of it, but because I find that nuance really important, because it's not, what if, so take, Keith and I think have expressed pretty clearly our fragile spirituality, or the bonds that in being an agnostic, that question isn't just prove it to me, it's also what is the next thing? Is there, like, that questioning isn't just defiance, as Keith I think well articulated earlier, right? There's a lot of different colors to it, and I think Ben is a great stand-in there, right? Because there are, imagine, Keith, what if tomorrow somebody came up to you and was like, "Oh, by the way, you're our part pope," right? And it's not just taking pictures with babies, which is what they kind of intimate at the beginning of this episode.
Right.
There's also, he does actually have some sort of guardianship over something
huge
more
responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think his wrestling is not only his perspective as somebody who I don't believe expresses any type of faith of his own, walking into it there as an objective, scientific-based person. So not only are you sort of thrusting that, but also he has the dual perspective of the wormhole aliens, right?
Yeah.
For him, they're just aliens. They're just like powerful aliens, and they have powers that we don't understand. But they're not gods. They just, they just have different abilities than we do. But for the Bajorans, they're gods. And when does a more powerful being that just happens to have more abilities become a god?
Yeah.
It's,
or forget beings, right? Like, it's an easy symbiote here. Way back in the day, fire, right?
Yeah.
Fire comes out of nowhere when the first caveman made a fire, and then they worshipped it like a god.
It's magic. Yeah.
Stonehenge, the stars, the sun. And
it's like, try explaining Wi-Fi to a cat.
Yeah,
it's god powers. That is the great, fascinating perspective on this. Are like what in the Star Trek world, in the objective scientific world, does a god make? Like, what makes a god? And that's just interpretation, literally just interpretation.
To a dog, you're a god. To a cat, you're a pillow.
Exactly. So, meanwhile, Kira is failing miserably at trying to be an artist, as her cast tells her to. She talks about it with the Vedic, and he dismisses her reservations about being a terrible artist. And he says, it's only because you're still clinging to your false life, still wearing your uniform. Yikes. So in O'Brien's quarters, Miles is trying to teach Molly some child-safe darts when Keiko finds his LARPing costume.
That's exactly the joke I made.
Well, that's what it is.
Mhm.
So they start making out again, and O'Brien wants to try for twins. This might be a episode. Just basically Mike now. Molly shows them a pony she drew, and
With
turns
5
out
legs? Dad, he's been watching her parents too long.
art critic. Oh, I see what you did there. Wow. I mean, no, I'm not going to say
Let's
it.
keep going.
Yikes. So, sadly, no LARPing or Pound Town for O'Brien. And we're learning from this, fatherhood sucks.
Mm.
Don't ever have children. And so in Sisko's office, he's concerned because the Federation is about to give up on guiding Bajor into the Federation. And this means that he's failed his mission because he gave up his job as emissary, which is what the Federation wanted him to do anyway. So being in a very difficult position, really screwed from both sides, like that horse. So then Kira says, I know you're having a bad day, but
Interesting.
I'm quitting.
Another episode, though, would have been great to see. What if, the prophets don't get them off the hook here? And what if he actually had to campaign against this guy? Like, where would they have written the Bajorans? Like, how would they have made their arguments? Who would have they followed?
I would have loved to have seen that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not what this is,
No.
right? It sort of would have had to. Well, I mean, I guess you could have gotten to the speaking to the prophets later, and still had the same resolution. Yeah, it's another one of those things where like they could have done another episode on this and made it really interesting, but I get why they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Kira says, I'm quitting. I'm going to be an artist like I'm told. And they're both sad. So in Act 4, O'Brien goes to hang out with Bashir. It's awkward because they're not able to hang out as much anymore. And they've both found stunt dart buddies, but they're bummed. O'Brien shotguns half a beer and leaves almost immediately. Then Odo calls Sisko. Keep up, Mike. Keep up. Get those
sorry.
screenshots going. There, here we go.
In,
Now
in a normal world, we would have spent more time with that Kira quitting scene.
Well, yeah. I mean, we'll get back to it because it is part of the thing. But I think it speaks to Kira's faith.
Yeah.
Like she's like,
I was saying,
I don't like this. This doesn't make sense to me, but I'm going to trust it. I'm going to give it a chance.
it's such a tough scene for actors too, because they really brings an emotional weight to it. Even though you, as an audience and as writers, she's not actually quitting, right? Like
right.
The episode will end and she'll still, or next week she's gonna be on the show. So I want to give kudos for that too, because that's a tough scene.
That is the job of an actor.
Yeah.
Right? To play each scene as your knowledge is only in that scene. Like you're in a musical, right? You know the ending of the show.
Yeah.
You've done this 8 times this week. You still have to play scene 2 as if it's the only scene you've been in.
Yep.
But yeah, no, it's interesting. So so they have the beer and they go, and then Odo calls Sisko kind of abruptly and says, "Oh, somebody's been killed on the promenade."
I know. I had to rewind it. I was like, "What did he say?"
What? And it's the Vedic, who we've talked with before, who just genially pushed a dude off of the 2nd level for not following his Dejara. And he went from 0 to murder real fast.
Quick, yeah.
Like happily unapologetic flat murder, which I my theory here is that this dude is a sociopath.
Mm-hmm.
And has been from the very beginning. And perhaps he chose the position of power because he likes to wield that power, and here he is. He's got a chance to do horrible things, and it feels incredibly like abrupt.
Yeah.
It feels like what we went from like, oh, you gonna make Kira make clay chickens, and now you're murdering a person.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people like that.
I think it's a good shortcut way, right? The episode clearly spends more time watching the struggle of the person of faith dealing with the hypocrisies and and it doesn't give a lot of time to like our side of the argument, right? A more rationally based, like this is some of the problems with that conflict. So they're like, well, if we just like show the ultimate where we get to if we just kind of blindly follow whoever and we say, oh, if it's A or B and you don't want to do it, well, you're dead, right? Then I think it's it's a good shortcut, I suppose.
It is a shortcut.
It's like instead of showing a
progression.
Like a oh God, I'm going to say these words. Like a good faith communist, right? Who really believes in like society trying to spread the wealth across evenly and like giving a campaign speech. You just show like Donald Trump, right? Like just like the most far played out, or like a Mussolini or whatever. Like you're like, okay, well, you're right. I guess the point is at the end of our argument, instead of just saying like you got to believe what you believe, at the end of our argument, it's
in case you're
Mussolini.
wondering, this is the bad guy. This is the bad guy.
Yeah.
The bad guy for sure. Yeah. But I also like my first thought was exactly that. Like, ooh, wow, that's really abrupt and really sort of shorthanded. I'm not sure how well set up it is. But then I think about real life, how quickly stuff like this escalates. Mm-hmm. How we go from a rally to January 6th, not to get all political about it, right? Like, oh, wow, we went from point A to like inconceivable escalation.
But obviously you recognize that him being a sociopath, well, even if it does, the problem is that it all comes back to what we said at the very beginning, my thesis statement, is that the argument is interesting when both actors are coming from a place of good faith. However, the problem exists in our lives and world is that most times one or both parties are not operating under good faith, right?
Yeah. No, and for sure.
Because then it becomes a scapegoat. It becomes your faith, the faith of millions good people become a scapegoat for your narcissistic or sociopathic needs.
And while Kira is a representation of the positive sides of faith, right? We see that she gives something and she gets something back. It actually is really healthy and positive for her. However, faith in itself, whether it's to a religion or a political party or a whatever, is very dangerous.
Yeah.
Because if it's faith-based, it means you are not to question, you are not to look into, you're not to challenge, you are to, regardless of whether this makes any sense or whether it's right or fair or just, you follow this. And that is the architecture for endless exploitation and endless, people of bad faith using other people's faith as a way to get away with whatever the hell they want. And it's usually not good stuff. So I don't need to get much further into that. Pick up on the inferences. You know what I mean, right? So like this is a perfect example. So I think this guy is like a full-on sociopath. And he's like, I just want to murder somebody. That'll be fun. And here we are. So anyway, Sisko calls a quorum in and confronts him. There you go. Sisko, you murdered somebody in my living room. Now I'm pissed. However, Akorum is not apologetic, and he's still pretty confident. And, which is like, ooh, yikes. And Sisko says, you know what? I want to take back my title of Emissary. Akorum says, try me, bitch. And Sisko says,
we're going up the butthole.
There's only one way to be sure, to go up the butthole and talk to the prophets. And this is where that could have been the ending of part 1, and part 2 is their like political battle in Bajor to retake, and like could have started a civil war, honestly.
So remind me, are the wormhole aliens always available, or is it just like kind of a rando when you go in?
They're available when they care to be.
Okay.
It is entirely up to them whether or not they are available, but they exist there outside of time and space. So who knows?
You don't necessarily need to be of high religious stature, even though these guys are. But we've never seen like average Joes chatting with the prophets.
Sure, we saw Quark.
Oh, that's right. You're right. There doesn't get any more average Joe than that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just anybody that goes in there. So
it's really the manifestation of that Joan Osborne song. What if God was one of us? Well, he is. He lives up there. He just
lives in the butthole.
Yeah.
Lives in the light hole, the lighty butthole. Yes. So they head into the wormhole together and wait. Nothing happens for a while, and then they're sucked into Wormholeville.
Also known as Gaussian blur.
Yeah, there you go. A little That's true. I use it all the time. Very handy. The prophets remember who they are. They did heal a quorum, but they don't quite get what they're fighting about because they're linear. And as we know from the pilot, wormholes, not linear. They say that the Dejaras belong in the past, and they sent a quorum into the future. Why did they send them in the future? To motivate Sisko. So this whole thing was designed by the prophets to get Sisko on board with being the emissary. Awesome.
I agree. But they don't... It's interesting because the prophets seem to not quite understand. It looks like they're learning too. Not the prophets, the wormhole aliens.
Depends on your point of view.
Yeah, right. So they're learning too, so they're now learning to utilize time and space in order to kind of like spread a message or do whatever they got to do to help out the Sisko, which I love, the capital Sisko.
The Sisko,
I never
that's
use
right.
the word emissary, right? So it's you're not sure if...
No, the emissary is
has
a Bajoran word.
Right, and has a very specific religious context, where here, my guess is, going forward, the Sisko has a much more functional function for them. So I'm curious to see where that goes. But interestingly, also, the wormhole I have here, quite literally, is they never take ownership of the decorum or the quorums, right? Or what's the word? The caste system?
Dejaras.
The Dejaras. So that seems to potentially have been invented by the Bajorans themselves, right? Yeah, not handed down.
Well, but they say it was of the past.
So
right.
they recognize that it was an old thing.
They recognize that it existed. I don't think they give a crap.
Yeah.
I don't think that's in any way. I think they recognized it as something that would piss off Sisko and motivate him to come back here and fight this battle.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean they are definitely, the specifics of the religion probably in this case I don't think the gods, right, give a much of a crap about the specifics. Mm-hmm. It's about the bigger picture for them. But Sisko says, all right, so let's return Akorum to his own time and wipe his memory. Akorum, interestingly, is fine with this. And he accepts that he was not the emissary. Right, so this wasn't something he made up. Because the first time I saw this episode, I'm like, oh, he's from our time. He's pulling a con.
Yeah, he's that little girl who was actually 30 and pretended to get adopted or whatever, the kid.
Right, except for she actually was a kid.
Yeah, no, I just saw that one too. Yeah. I guess I should have used the high school basketball player who was like 30.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could win the state championship.
I mean, do you think I should go back and try to win the hockey championship?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I'm a sophomore. Yeah. I also, slow down, kids. I can't keep up with you. Yeah, that's exactly what would happen. So, Sisko, so Akorum is fine with this and he zaps out. But Sisko still has questions. And the prophets don't really answer them, but they say, and this is very important, we are of Bajor. You are of Bajor. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. So later, Keiko, being a good partner, is busy and tells O'Brien to go play with Bashir. He needs you. She gets it. So then she sets up a play date with Bashir as well. Good job, Keiko. Although, I'm sure there was a better way to communicate this. Like, it doesn't need to be binary. It's also like you're on a station. So if you want to go hang out with your buddy, you don't have to like drive 45 minutes.
Yes.
Just walk down the hall.
Yes. I agree with that. I knew that was coming. But at the same time, because they've been so nuanced about their marriage, and I've often complimented it, the storytelling and that variety, I think this is a not so 90s commentary on male fragility. And
for sure.
Keith and I have often talked about, like, you want to have a conversation with your very like dude bro male friend and don't know how to do it. If you're a female or another male, whatever, go have a catch with them. Generally speaking, that'll unlock some doors. And I think this is just like a super shortcut way to, do the wifey thing of like, oh, he needs you. Oh, he needs you. And, but it was, I think, an interesting way to tell, to show their, aside from this ending, which is, yes, it is what it is. I think it's clever and cute. The whole existence of the B plot here, and because they built it so well, the O'Brien-Bashir relationship, I actually found their coyness with each other throughout the episode, instead of trite in any way, I found it kind of beautiful and very cute.
Well, and
I know it's
the
cutesy. It's written cutesy, which
Yeah.
could be gross.
But I actually
don't.
don't think this is a story about O'Brien and Bashir. I think it's a story between O'Brien and Keiko, and O'Brien feeling like he has to choose between his family and his friend, and Keiko being like, well, you don't actually. Like, I don't. You have to help with the kids. You have to be an equal partner here. But also, like, I don't want you all here all the time.
Well, also, she spent the last year with very much identifying her work-life balance, where his has been all kind of out of whack. So it's you can read whatever you want out of it, but I think it's really well written, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do too. I wish it was only the A story. I find this story like nice, but I don't think it's necessarily necessary. And I think that the main story was more interesting. Anyway, let's finish that.
We've seen worse B stories, trust me.
We sure as hell have. So on the promenade, Kira gives Sisko a piece of art she made. It's great. So that's some good comedic prop work.
Except she had absolutely accepted that she was going to go and do that with the rest of her life and give up all the good she could have done.
Because that's her faith. That's her faith. She but we also don't know 2 years into it whether or not that would have challenged her more. But she's like, I have to try.
I just think, in my opinion, and I'm not discounting any of the things you said or the defenses of it. I just think if you're going to then have it have more weight, have her have some sort of realization, because to just play it off as a prop gag at the end, I think cheapens it.
Well, you know what? I think this is exactly. It gets back to her.
And then they come back out, and it's just like the end of this episode is like psych gag.
I think her willingness to do this. Of course, it doesn't make sense to you or I.
Right.
Of course. Like, that's ridiculous. There's no way she would do that. She would at least have to, like,
the fate of
wrestle
all
with
of
it
Bajor.
more.
This dude just got thrown off a balcony. Like, there's some weight to what took place here. But the way we're going to, let's have a Rock the Gino, and here's some bad custom action figures.
Well, but again, like, it is about, like, the issue is not tossing it off at the end. The issue is her decision-making to accept it. Right? But that's the thesis statement. If you don't have faith, there's no way to explain it. But if you do, that's just what it is. And I think
but she did nothing. She was like, thank God the emissary went up and took care of it. He went up and talked to the butthole aliens, because otherwise I would have had to go work at Toys R Us.
But part of her faith was trusting that it was going to get resolved correctly. And that like, in the end, this is like, whatever is supposed to be will work out fine. So I'm going to go along and trust that if this isn't the right thing, it'll get resolved, which it did. So her faith was rewarded in that way. Anyway, to finish it off, the timeline has also been changed. Bakura finished the poem he never finished before, but everybody remembers the main timeline, which is really interesting. Time manipulation there.
JD hates it. He thinks she should remember it. If the timeline really changed, she should remember and not forget, and not have being rewritten in real time, which I think there's ramifications of the way they dealt with the timeline split. And we make it a little too easy.
There would be, right? You'd think the consequences of somebody living would cause more changes in the world, but if they have the ability to have all of these powers, like, why can't they wall off his existence from changes in the timeline? Like, if they're all powerful like this, why can't, why do we think it's easy for them to send somebody back in time and wipe their memory and not wall off the consequences of that person being there? They're both magical powers.
Yeah, but
magic is magic.
Magic is magic, but I'm just saying, JD had a problem with it.
All right, JD, explain yourself, sir. Let's get into. I mean, I get it. Let's get into it. So, lastly, the Bajoran guy asked Sisko to bless his daughter's quinceañera, and this time Sisko is happy about it. He has finally accepted his role as the emissary, and we are accepting our role in the AlamarEmmys. Mike Clearly's got to take Mom to the doctor, so no time for bumpers. Let's talk about wormholes. Yeah,
I mean, the time thing at the end, I guess, and the whole, I think it purposefully, the communication between and presence of and motivations of the wormhole aliens, I think, are literally wormholes, right? I think that ambiguity is it's basically, what if God was one of us? And I'm interested to see what their motivations are. Are any of them religious? Clearly they want the best for Bajorans, but they don't seem particularly interested in their religious beliefs, right? Which is
No, they're not. I mean, I think the religion of it all is entirely a Bajoran
manifestation.
Right? Like I don't think they consider themselves gods. I don't think they give a crap about the faith.
And to me, right, to kind of put a finer point. So let's go in order quickly here. I don't really have any specific wormholes as far as things that did not make sense or because they seem to. This episode is very well plotted and made and thought through. I think they definitely knew that since the studio was not keen on a religious episode, if they were going to do it, it had to be good. And I think that. Do you have anything specific?
I mean, I think the wormholes that I believe I have headcanoned, such as the murderer just being a sociopath who took the position of Vedic so he could be a sociopath, because that was pretty damn abrupt, and like everybody being like fine with that was like. Whoa.
Well, I mean, there's other ways to headcanon that, right? Like he basically said he told him he needed to change his faith. I think it would have been more powerful if they'd swapped that scene with when Kira decides to give up, because then it's like, oh. So if we're not, so clearly there's something that's stated in the text that if you don't follow the caste system, your penalty is death.
Yeah, it's very Old Testament.
Yeah, so that would be kind of interesting. Regardless, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, but other than that, I think it's really tight. I like it. Let's talk best moment.
Yeah, for me, the best moment is actually the ending, the way they handle the wormhole prophets, because it fixes for me a lot of the things that got my ire up. Because, the conversation, the consequences, all of the things I've said, is that, are we giving equal weight to each side of the story, and what would be more interesting religiously, blah, blah, blah. To me, what I think is the most interesting is what you said at the very end, which is regardless of people dealing with their faith and whether we should at all, or whether it should impact how the Federation is dealing with the Bajorans, or whether Kira stays or goes or any of that, regardless of it, that is all here. The actual thing they are worshiping as deities, and they are attributing everything they say to deities, clearly to me, deities instead of deities, clearly to me, have a different objective, right? And regardless of how, and it's cool because Ben never even decides to try to have that conversation with Kira, being like, I've talked to them a couple times now, your prophets, and they don't seem particularly interested in me as a emissary or what you're doing down there or any of this religious stuff. They seem to want something else. I can't wait for someone to just ask them what's up. I guess he tried here. And so I think that for all of my bluster through this episode, and I've just tried to basically play devil's advocate best I can, that scene was the weight of our argument, right? What if what you're saying is God telling you to do these things isn't that at all, and you're just writing that fiction for them, right?
Right. And even if there is a God who does give a crap about any of these things, your interpretation of it is utterly arbitrary. It's your interpretation.
And that's why I love the prophets, because there's clearly they are fallible, even though they're magical. They struggle to communicate. They struggle to understand even how we plebeians, which is what I often think about, if there was a God, right? How we plebeians do things must seem so archaic, right? Time? What a limiting thing. And because it's so limiting to them, it's hard for them to even really harness or understand it, which is what's interesting with them. So I really think that scene encapsulates the trouble in trying to just accept religion or accept this particular interpretation of religion at its face. And the episode does yeoman's work throughout with its other storyline, but I think this was a great encap. Just the prophet's existence and the way they exist is really powerful. Sorry, that was poorly articulated, but the prophets do not want Keith and I to finish this episode today. So let's get to what works.
The prophets knew we were on the clock, and they are not linear.
No.
You get so sad.
Keith, I didn't want to tell you at the top, but you did actually, your presentation of what this episode is and what it's trying to say actually,
Why are we in the
I
darkness?
have no idea what's happening anymore. Oh, God. Oh, Lord help us. That was
What a mess.
It was going so well. Was it?
No, it wasn't.
It did reframe the whole episode for me, and I actually had to check some of my sort of ire at the door. But I will say this. Just like the B story, listen, when you take huge swings, and I think this is a big swing this episode, because like it's challenging.
Sure, sure.
It's understandable why some people are like, nah, it's not for me. Give me the pews, like you said. It is challenging, but you've heard me say all along, I love the stuff that's challenging. I love the gray area. And I guess initially, in my initial watch, I felt like it gave too fine a period at the end of the sentence, right? It said, oh, well, we had some interesting debate between the conflict with our religion, and so we just went to the source. They cleared up the conflict, period, end of sentence, everybody's happy now. Which, in one light, it is that a little bit, but it's only that if you decide, right, conveniently, that the prophets are precisely what you've said they were the whole time, right, the aliens. But I think the episode actually does, upon the second watch, does show what could happen if you take things to their potential extreme with the murder guy, and not only the murder guy, but Kira, you know, you could look at her saying, hey, I'm going to take everything I've worked for, everything I've come to believe, and my importance to this positive relationship between the Federation and Bajor, and I'm going to sacrifice it all because this dude said we should. And that dude is somebody, right?
Well, she doesn't think she's sacrificing.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Depends on the lens. But if you look at the other lens, like I am, you would say, well, what a mistake you're making, right? Based purely on what they show us at the end of the episode is potentially, if not explicitly, just some aliens trying to alien that have nothing to do with gods and all that, right? But the episode does a really good job that if you look at it at either lens, and today I did, because last night I looked at it through my lens, and today, since you said up in the beginning, I've really tried to look at it in our recap, our really terribly truncated recap, like it through the other lens, and I think it presents both things in fairly good light. I'm sure our patrons and our viewers will let us know their thoughts, and I hope they do. Please take this opportunity to be verbose in your comments, because I'm really interested.
Loquacious.
Yeah, I'm really interested in your more poignant and well thought out opinions than mine. Mm-hmm. However, I still feel like there's a lot of fruit that gets left on the vine, and you can't do it all in 45 minutes. So it's whatever shortcomings I may have, and I have a few, are pretty much forgiven. I would take a not 100% executed deep philosophical conversation versus just LARPing the whole time. That said, I disagree with Keith. I actually think the B story is a nice bite-sized kind of fun story, beautifully first beginning, middle, ended, and a welcome back to Keiko. Now, are they going to keep her on the show, or is that we just don't have to show her? Yeah, we'll see.
She's on the station right now, so
I'm fine with the B plot. Despite what sounds like me not liking the episode, I actually very much did. I liked the conversation. I liked having it. I like when I'm challenged and I feel conflicted and get a little worked up. That's awesome. Give me that. So last week, even though I really lowballed where we were,
you sure did.
I really still am enjoying that I've now begun to want more and expect more from my Deep Space Nine, so I'm okay with it. I liked it more than last week. I still don't think it's the top tier Deep Space Nining because it did lack the little bit of though there were stakes for sure. What's happening, man? I need me to know what's going on with the Dominion. Let's get back to where the meat is. I'm gonna say 81 self-sealing stem bolts.
81, yeah. No, I think that's fair, and I really this is an episode that, like I said, first off, when I'm 16, I don't care about this episode. At 43, I find it really fascinating. And I think it's a really interesting exploration of all of these things. I think it does it in a nuanced fashion. And I'll just sort of shout out to the level of difficulty of these Bajoran religion prophets emissary stories. And this, this is considered part 2 of a emissary trilogy for Sisko on this. And I think the level of difficulty is so high because you have these stories happening with parallel interpretations. Wormhole aliens versus gods. Religion versus science. You have, Sisko's point of view. What is, how do you make this story fit into multiple points of view, right? How does this story track for Kira as someone of faith who believes in the religion, who believes in the prophecies and the interpretations and the practices, and that these are gods, these are prophets, these are not aliens with being whatever. How do you make this fit in that world and in Sisko's world?
Yeah.
Where these are just aliens who have powers and abilities we don't understand, not because they are supernatural, but because we just don't understand them, because we are not capable, we're not as powerful. We don't understand. Like it's the cat understanding taxes, right? Doesn't mean it's supernatural.
Yeah.
Just means it's a power we don't understand. And how do we tell this larger story? And especially with these wormhole aliens or prophets existing outside of time and space. And so they do have these magical powers, partly just from knowledge, right? Because they know what comes ahead, what is before, and they exist in all of that time at the same place. And how do you tell this story and have this all track? How does it all make sense intellectually, emotionally, as part of the larger story arc of the series and of the character arcs of Sisko and Kira? Because they both have these complex relationships with this whole ecosystem. So they're really just putting together an incredibly complex puzzle that I think they do incredibly successfully. And not just in this episode, but in the whole arc, this whole storyline that has been going on for the whole series, and will continue for the whole series. As somebody who is a sort of like a hard agnostic, I do not have a belief. I don't have a denial of. I don't have a belief of the supernatural or any of that. This has to track to me too, and has to make sense to somebody of faith and make sense to somebody who does not have that type of a faith. It's absolutely fascinating and is aiming higher with the intellectual ideas than like Next Gen might explore this for an episode, but it's not exploring it in the big wild picture of the star arc of the series, and it's absolutely fascinating to me. And I think they do it incredibly well. I think that they're the groundwork that they have laid up until this point. They're not spending a lot of time explaining what's going on with the wormhole alien. They're trusting you to have seen it. The mere mention of Kai Wynn changes the entire episode. Yep. Like it's like, ooh, wow, ooh, here we go. That it's just, this is where your series momentum allows this episode to be better than it would be by itself. Again, getting back to Next Gen, right? Next Gen would have this episode, but it would be these aliens we've never heard of. We don't know any of this lore. We don't have any of it with our main characters. They're coming in and observing these people who are having this thing. And there's plenty of episodes like that, but it doesn't, like, who cares? Right? It's sort of like we're looking at ants on a log, as opposed to we're part of it, and it's part of an ongoing story. And I think that's where the serialization of what's going on here in Deep Space Nine, because it's not just a serialized story, it's a serialized intellectual, spiritual exploration that makes this show so interesting and so intellectually challenging. Right? It challenges somebody's faith, and it challenges, for me, it challenged my lack of faith and my anger and distrust of any of that. It challenges both. And I think if you walk into this as a tremendously religious person or a hardcore atheist, you're both going to be like, oh wow, all right, I feel like I got to think about some stuff. Great TV. So I love that. I love that. So anyway, B story, fine, whatever. It was fine. The bromance we've now sort of pretty well established now. I liked Keiko's wisdom in this. Whether the dumb men with their with their male fragility could have maybe just worked this out, or because they didn't need to work it out. O'Brien could have been to Keiko like, hey, what do you want here? Is it okay if I do this? Do you need this? Whatever. That's
It's
how
more
this
satisfying if they had that heart to heart together and were like, hey, man, I miss you. That would have
been good to have them
TV.
communicate,
Yeah.
but we know they don't communicate so hot. So for me, after that big speech about the importance of the storyline in the whole thing, I think the episode for me is an 89.
Okay.
I think it's a very good episode. It's not a legendary episode, but it's a really important piece of the larger puzzle, which I'm much more excited about the whole puzzle. So there you go. Thank you for watching. Watch all of our other shows. We really appreciate it. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/KandM. This episode was a 7.2 on IMDb, which makes it 109 out of 173, a below average episode on IMDb.
That tracks, right? That tracks.
Up next, Rules of Engagement, which we might have a little, might be a little bit of the practice next week.
Oh, yes, please.
So look out. Gonna be fun. We will see you back here next week with Rules of Engagement. Thank you so much. We will see you back with another episode of Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Thank you for watching K&M Entertainment. If you enjoyed our particular brand of nonsense, please like and subscribe. Or become one of our patrons at patreon.com/KNM.